agenda. I know it's just 4 o'clock, but I will get started. If folks come in late, that's perfectly fine. They won't miss too much. I just wanted to say that we have Carmen here on tech support today. So if you have any questions about navigating Zoom or have trouble with anything, feel free to message Carmen in the chat privately or publicly, and Carmen will be there to assist you. Resources from today's event will be shared tomorrow via email. So don't worry, I'm sure we'll have lots of resource-packed presentation here, and so you'll have access to all of that tomorrow. So that's something to keep in mind. My name is Essie Lenchner. I'm the Assistant Director of the Middle East Studies Program, as well as the Communications Assistant for the IRIS NRC. And this event is co-sponsored by both of these institutes. So this was a perfect event for me to come and moderate. So the IRIS NRC is the Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center. We support and enhance international and global awareness and inspire informed thinking about the complexities of our world. We provide resources and expertise to K-12 teachers and students, post-secondary educators and students, and the community at large. Next, I'm going to introduce our featured speaker, Maria Hantzopoulos. Maria is an associate professor of education at Vassar College, where she's a coordinator of the Adolescent Education Certification Program and a participating faculty member in the programs in International Studies, Urban Studies, and Women's Studies. She is the faculty director for teaching development for the college and is currently chief of education, current chair of the education department, apologies. Her research interests range from school culture and climate, project-based assessments, migration and peace and human rights education, and broadly considers how education processes structure, inequity, and in their context and beyond. Her work has appeared in a variety of journals, including Anthropology and Education Quarterly, TC Record, Social Studies Research and Practice, and Policy Futures in Education. She's the author of multiple books, including Restoring Dignity, Human Rights in Action, and Peace Education, International Perspectives. Her work has been supported through foundations such as the Spencer Foundation, the British Council, and the Social Science Research Council. Her forthcoming book is Education for Peace and Human Rights, an Introduction. Before Vassar, she worked with pre-service student teachers at Columbia University's Barnard and Teachers Colleges and conducted staff development for middle and high school teachers throughout New York City and nationally. She also taught and worked in New York City public schools, served in several public school planning teams, and worked with and continues to work with a variety of established youth organizations and professional educator organizations. Maria, thank you so much for being here, and feel free to take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to today talk to you a little bit about, well, I know there was a book, Nowhere Boy, for this book club, but I'm going to really situate that book in sort of a larger curriculum project that I worked on with others. But before, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but before I do that, I would love it if folks could just, in the chat, just introduce yourself. Where are you Zooming from? What grade or, age group do you teach? Why this workshop? Just put that in the chat as I'm going through the initial slides, just as a way, since we can't introduce everyone. And if someone could put that in the chat for me, because I'm going to move to the next slide as well. Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about both this larger curriculum project and how we can situate this book, but also the workshop itself is going to sort of reflect some of the practices that and the pedagogies that inspire, I think, the work. And so this quote from Paulo Freire, I think, kind of exemplifies both what we wanted to do in this larger curriculum project, as well as what I want to do in this workshop. And so what progressive educators need to do is bring life itself into their classrooms. They need to critically read day-to-day life and analyze with learners the shocking facts and disjunctures of our democracy. They need to expose learners to examples of discrimination taken from daily experience, race, class, and gender discrimination, and examples of disrespect for public things, examples of violence. These examples should be analyzed to reveal their aggressive contradiction of the authenticity of democratic life. And this is from his book, Letters to Christina, that's his daughter. And I start with this quote because the project that I'm going to tell you about, I worked on with 4 other folks. Some of you might have met Rouzbeh Shirazi last month or a few weeks ago. I know he did a workshop for this group, as well as Monisha Bajaj, Amina Gafar-Kuhar, and Zina Zakaria. We worked on a larger curriculum project called Rethinking the Region, New Curricular Approaches to Teaching MENA for grades 9 to 12. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that work because the framing for that work is really relevant when we get into the discussion about the book as well, which is going to be at the end of this workshop. So as I go through, we're going to start with an interactive activity. We're going to look at some multimedia reels. I'm going to give you an overview of the curriculum. Then we'll kind of zoom in on the book a little bit, and then we'll have a question and answer in closing. So it's going to be pretty jam-packed for this hour. Okay. All right, so for this next part, we're going to do a brainstorm. And I want you to think first of 3 key terms, phrases, or images that come to your mind when you hear women of the Middle East and North Africa. We're not even going to unpack that statement, just 3 images, phrases, terms, and really just a brainstorm. Same thing when it comes to men of the Middle East and North Africa. And so as you're thinking of that, if you can just quickly jot it down, I'm going to switch my screen share now, and I'm going to ask you to put it up on this bulletin board. And I'm going to take you through that process. Okay, so maybe first just take a minute to jot down those 3 key terms or phrases or images for women, 3 key terms, phrases, or images for men. Just take a minute to do that on your own. I'm going to stop the screen share and bring up another screen share. Now, what I'm going to do is in the chat, before I do this, I'm going to share with you a link to a Jamboard. I know some folks might be familiar with this now. I just shared it in the chat. And if you can open up the link to the Jamboard on your screen, that would be great. And I'm also going to share it with you all via the screen share. So just give me 1 minute as I navigate this. Can everyone see it? Is it up? Can someone give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. So what I want you to do now is take 2 examples from, I asked you to brainstorm 3, but just take 2, and someone's already doing this, which is great. Go to this sticky note, which is right here, this right here. And on your sticky note, write the word, phrase, or image, and do that twice. And we'll start with women. So just go ahead and do it, and I'll move it around. And it's anonymous, we won't see who's posting it. So really, anything that comes to mind, even if it's seemingly not a good image even. And I'm just moving these around. Yeah, we have a couple of the same, yeah. Because they're coming in so fast, I'm trying to group them, but I might not group them all well, so just bear with me. All right, so if we can just take a minute to look at these varied images that came up, and they range from things like oppression, some people were named, second-class citizens, religion, Muslim was named, education, pride, many people just wrote hijab, controversies, limits, coins, victims of war, food, family, poverty, refugee. So a lot of different things have come up. Driving has come up a few times as well. So I'm just gonna leave that. Now I'm gonna go to the next one. And now I want you to put your sticky notes up for the men, and that's in this next frame. So again, the sticky notes are here. I have that there, sorry. Okay, just moving these around, and I take it folks are reading them as they're being put up, and I'm trying to space them out so we can see them all. All right. Okay, so here we go. I think that was close to something here. All right, so we see different categories ranging from bearded, that came up, patriarchy, public sphere, religious, power, sunglasses, imam, business traders, soccer, football, family responsibilities, dominant and driven, jeeps and cars, loud music, lazy, business traders, potentially militant, intolerant of women's rights, greater independence, power, traditional roles, adhering to strict gender roles, male dominance, pious. Now, obviously, this is just an activity of the images coming to mind. And so I'm going to stop the screen share. We'll come back to these later. Go back to the slideshow. Just bear with me as we're doing this. And then we'll pretty much be on the slideshow after this. Great. And so overall, if you could just say in the chat, where do you think, when you think of, where do you think these terms, phrases, and ideas come from? If you could just share that a little bit in the chat right now. In general, where do we get these images, phrases, and ideas? And it can be from a variety of places. So we're seeing things like mainstream media, film, literature, media, Orientalism, media, books, strong stereotypes, popular culture, stereotypes from the media, movies, TV, news, etc. Exactly. So later on, when I share the slides, I'm going to put those poster boards in here for you so you have them. I just can't do it right now. So I'm leaving that blank, but you'll get a copy of the slideshow later. Someone puts 9/11 still plays a major influence. Anecdotes, personal knowledge, that my academic Orientalism, all of that is in there. Okay. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Chimamanda Adichie's, The Danger of a Single Story, but I just want to isolate sort of one clip from that to talk a little bit about what she argues for, both the power of a single story. She's not arguing for that. She's talking about that a single story has power, but that the necessity that we have, there's the necessity for multiple stories, perspectives, and representations to challenge master narratives that frame people as they stereotype them. She argues the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So I'm going to play just a clip that I want you to think about as we get into our discussion today. And again, if you've even seen this multiple times, it's still really good to revisit this clip and what she's saying. So I'm just going to open it up. at this part around 9:27. If you've never seen this, I do recommend watching the whole thing, and you can do that at another time. We just don't have time today. Oops, what just happened there? Okay. So we're starting at 9:27. Okay, 9:26, that's okay.
So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political walls, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power, I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Ukuloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue.
Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll leave it there. She says the problem is not that they are untrue, but they're incomplete. And then she goes on to say, I'm sorry, I accidentally hit that. I don't want to go back. But she does go on to say, oh, there we go. That for that reason, we need a balance of stories. We need multiple stories. So I thought right now, if possible, apologies about that. I didn't expect it to just stop right in the middle there. Let me see if I can just get to the end there. because she says it so well.
And to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes, the immense ones, such as the horrific rapes in Congo, and depressing ones, such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe. And it's very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides?
So I'm going to stop it there because she opens with that, but I really just wanted to get at the sense about this idea of multiple stories versus the single story. So what I'm going to ask folks to do, I'm going to put you in small group chat just for a couple minutes. I'm going to stop this share. And I'm just going to, oh, it doesn't seem like I have breakout room features. Do you have that, Leslie or anyone? That's okay. Why don't we just put in the chat real quick right now? What are your reactions to this? What came up for you? What resonated with you in terms of what she said? Anyone can just put that in the chat right now. That would be great. The relationship between the single story and power. How limited is the information we get about other places? Not everyone has their story shared or told. Not all women in MENA wear hijab. I'm feeling I'm missing the whole story for so many possible narratives. Makes me reflect on how many stories I know for each country, region in the world, and I know many stories about some places and zero stories about others. If you know one person's story, you only know one person's story. We have to rethink the entire trajectory of our social studies curriculum. I use this in the classroom. It's very powerful for students to start to think about the whole story. I need to know the Ingo I have is not the whole story. Okay. Image. Okay, yeah, maybe. Info, sorry, thank you. All right, so great, a complete story with both sides. Reflection changes rhetoric. Misinformation about other cultures is overwhelming, and we need to hear many counter narratives to begin to understand. Okay, so I'm gonna now go back to the slideshow, and I'm gonna show you another clip. Earlier, we said we get a lot of our images from media, from movies, from the news. So I actually have a clip here, and it's from a movie from the 80s. And I'm gonna show the whole trailer. And I know some of you attended Rusbeh's talk a few weeks ago as well. So I think that's also why I chose this clip, because I think he might have mentioned this movie in his talk. But I'm just going to leave it as is. And as you're watching, I just want you to take note of what's coming up for you in terms of the single story. Okay.
Well, it's my turn. You always say
I can't see your screen.
Oh, sorry.
Your screen needs to be shared.
Sorry, I forgot to share it. I'm sorry. Go back to sharing it. Oh, it's not sharing? Okay. Just give me 1 minute. Apologies, folks. All right. Okay. How's that? Sorry.
Yes.
Thanks.
On Daddy's lap. Well, it's my turn. You always sit on
Don't
Daddy's
fight
lap.
over me, girls. You know, I was born in Prussia. Well, they call it Iran now.
It scares me.
All I want to do is go for 2 weeks with you and Martov and visit my family.
In 1984, Betty Mahmoudi's husband took her and her daughter to Iran to meet his family.
This all changed.
He swore they would be safe.
I know it's a different culture. I just don't understand it.
He swore they would be happy. He swore they'd be coming home soon.
Sweetheart, you haven't packed anything. You want me to do it for you?
No,
He lied.
I don't know how to say this to you. We're not going back. We're staying here. I want us to live in Iran.
What, are you crazy? We're Americans. Your daughter's an American.
I know it's the right decision if you just give it a chance.
No, I won't stay here. You can't.
Are you listening? You're in my country now. You're my wife. You do as I say. You understand me?
If you marry an Iranian man, you automatically become an Iranian citizen.
I've told you before, you don't touch the phone and you don't leave the house.
The laws regarding women are very strict.
It is your duty to tell your husband everything. You cannot have secrets.
You have no rights to the children.
I'll be with you. I'll help you.
If they catch you trying to escape with your daughter, they could execute you.
There are 3 principal ways out of Iran.
I promise you I won't leave you.
You'll never see Martov again. Do you understand me?
Dear Lord, hear our prayer. Please help us leave Iran and get back to America. Please let nothing separate us. Keep us always safe in your care.
We must go now.
Metro Goldwyn Mayer proudly presents Academy Award winner Sally Field in the terrifying true story of a mother and her daughter whose only crime was being American. Not without my daughter.
So if you could just put in the chat real quick, what came up for you as you watched this video? What connections did you see in this clip with maybe even some of the brainstorming activity we did earlier, or even in this concept of the single story? You know, were there any differences? I mean, I think there was maybe some more nuance in some of the brainstorm in some instances. So if we could just put that in the chat, that would be great. So a lot of binaries, safety, danger, American, Iranian, male, female, Christian, Muslim. So these kind of strict binaries, these polar dichotomies. They thought they were safe, they weren't. Was so extra. The clip reinforced all the stereotypes. I think there's a reason that this story was made into a film. It was darker than I expected. I saw this film when I was younger. Watching the trailer now is almost comical. Hollywood's role in, I can't read them all, sorry. We're getting Hollywood's role in perpetuating US foreign policy. On the one hand, the words I added in the exercise were represented in that clip, but the clip itself was upsetting for how awful the stereotypical representation was. The movie is much more nationalist than I remember. This terrified me, reminded me that one of my friends assumes this and what happens when you marry into a culture other than American. All of the roles were still somehow whitewashed. Yeah, right. So this is a particularly, you know, it is kind of a shocking clip. All the Iranians were dehumanized. Yeah. But it was a popular movie and I was, we don't have enough time, but there are some other clips I originally was going to show you. I was also going to show a news clip that was probably from the mid to late 2000s, you know, I can't remember the exact date, but it was in the context of Iraq. And then also this other kind of montage, which I want to tell you a little bit about, that was made called Planet of the Arabs, but it's based on Jack Shaheen, who is he passed away recently, but he was a scholar at UCLA who had a book who did this wonderful research, and the book is called Real Bad Arabs. And it looks at over 1,000 films that depict both Arabs and Muslims. And again, that gets conflated. I'm going to get into this, Iranians are not Arab, well, some are in a small region, but majority are not. But the conflation of Arab and Islam and all of this, perpetuates this kind of Islamophobia. But he looks at Hollywood depictions of both Arabs and Muslims in over 1,000 films. And out of the thousands of films, let me just get the exact numbers. 12 depictions were positive, 52 were what he determined to be even-handed, and over 900 were negative, right? And so if you get a chance, you can go back and look at this video montage by Jackie Salhoun, which is called Planet of the Arabs, which kind of puts together a lot of these clips. It's very intense and it's actually a bit jarring, but that's something that you can go back and look at if you want, but just to reinforce the point of how this single story is distorted and told and perpetuated, and really does, as someone said, point to the dehumanization of groups of people, basically. Okay, so now I'm going to get to our bigger project. And so that group that I mentioned earlier, we kind of came together, we applied for a grant with the Social Science Research Council and the British Council to really write curriculum. And so what we wanted to do was analyze textbooks, the common categories in textbooks, to look at how MENA is depicted and offer robust curricular alternatives for 9 to 12 teachers that integrates new scholarship on MENA. We wanted to kind of challenge, these dominant narratives that emphasize discrete civilizations. We were taking a historical approach, and that traditionally it set groups at odds with each other at the expense of historical material connections, which kind of contributes to sort of single stories today. And then we wanted to create new curricular content that illustrated shared cultural, economic, military, religious, and social scientific networks and practices over time. So what we really wanted to do then, the rationale was to counter the misconceptions about the Middle East and North Africa, specifically in textbooks, popular media, and political discourse, shed light on multiple realities, truths, and experiences of the region throughout space and time, and share culturally relevant and anti-racist practices and curriculum that can interrupt mainstream discourses. And in that sense, we are contesting the often misguided and damaging ways this region and its people are framed, both in the media and in these analyzed textbooks. So, So we wanted to decenter dominant narratives, destabilize the authority of the textbook as well, because we're not getting into that, present a more nuanced picture of historical processes, and promote the understanding that all history has to be seen as contingent, particular, and local, and reclaim knowledge production on some level, that it's not coming from this one source. So what we did, I'm not going to get into all of it, but we analyzed 4 world history textbooks. We shared our analyses, and so we coded them and we looked for different themes, and all that information is on this website. I'm going to share with you later. So if you're really interested, you can do a deep dive. We share these analyses with historians and researchers and experts in the US and in Egypt and Lebanon in particular. They gave us some resources. We synthesized their scholarship and resources into creating a new robust curriculum and wanted it to be web-based. And then we collaborated with school districts to sort of disseminate this. So let me just go here. So these were kind of some of the categories that we tried to trouble in the curriculum. And again, there's more about it on the website, but I'm just sharing this with you. And then, for instance, we did a lesson on women and gender to sort of disrupt gender stereotypes that proliferate. This is just a snapshot, of what we do in a lesson. Again, I'm just going through this quickly so we can get to the book also. And then this is the website. You can look it up later. You'll get a copy of these slides, so you can look that up later. But just wanted to share with you. But the point is this framing about multiple truths, realities, experiences, both from historical and contemporary perspectives were really, really important. So it's more about an approach and a framing than the content. And that's how you engage content really as well. So now I kind of want to segue into the book that we read, which was my first time reading this book as well. So, you know, and I have a child who is going to read it next. I actually bought it for her as well. And so I thought maybe, are we able to get into groups, or is that not a possibility? I'm just asking maybe someone on the tech team.
I don't think that would be possible, unfortunately. I believe it has to be set up before the meeting.
Okay. All right. No problem. All right. So maybe what we can do is, can we have a conversation then? Can I take it off the chat so we can just hear from folks? Great. All right. Wonderful. So I'm going to stop the share, but I want us to think about these questions with regard to the book. There's, you know, we can't really talk about the whole book, but maybe considering this framing, how might this book complicate some of the dominant narratives that proliferate? What might be some of the limitations or tensions? Are there points where it kind of reifies some of those things or perpetuates or both? And how could you use this book considering the framings that we discussed earlier in your own classrooms? So maybe we can just open that up to a discussion right now. Sound good? So I'm going to stop the share so I can see everyone.
Well, at one point, the book deals with connecting the Holocaust with Jewish experience in Europe with the Arab experience. And, you know, the dichotomy of Jewish and Islam in the Middle East is one that seems to dominate America's understanding of the Middle East. So there's one place, I think, where the text kind of introduces the student to at the end, when the Jewish Aid Society is important in bringing them into the United States. So I think that talks about the issues of the shared humanity rather than the differences of points of view.
Sure. Other folks have thoughts, and I can put, oh great, thank you, Leslie, for putting that in the chat since we're not using a screen. I'm just wanting to hear from folks and see folks as they speak, which is why I turned off the PowerPoint.
I really liked the humanization of Ahmed's family. I think he's a very relatable character, and he kind of deconstructs the image of people in MENA having lives that look completely different from people in the United States. I think that, like, he has a family, he has siblings, he has parents, he has a grandfather, and that and, you know, they have a house, and the reason that they don't have electricity or access to things that we have access to is because of this war, and it wasn't always that way. And so I think that really, just the humanizing of this teenager really kind of deconstructs that dominant narrative.
Other folks?
Just to build off of that, I just like how it empowers the younger generation to be able to feel like they can do something about this issue that seems so adult and unmanageable, that maybe they could grow into people that would be able to change the world more so than adults can even today.
Right. Kind of very powerful that the young people sort of got together to solve or to help, you know, Ahmed. Yep. Mm-hmm. And how they did it, and how they were willing to risk, you know, they broke the law. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts about some of the complicating dominant narratives? Were there some limitations that folks felt were, you know, in teaching the book, or maybe some potential for kind of perpetuating some misunderstandings?
I'll just chime in with one little comment, which is that I love how the author inflects so much nuance, specifically around, it seems like to help immigrants or refugees is the obvious good thing to do in the book. And I think that remains the main theme, but then towards the end, when the police speaks about, the cop talks about why refugees and immigrants are a problem, there's some part of you that feels a little bit of understanding and sympathy, because there are political complications that result out of this mass influx of refugees. And that's when I felt, as someone who really likes to have things in black and white,
Right, so there was a lot of nuance. Yeah, I was actually really happy about all the nuance that was in the book as well, because it is hard, to find all of those narratives kind of complicated in some ways, for sure.
I guess I kind of struggled a little bit with the ending, being that they're going to America and then the book ends and it almost seems like, okay, they're going to America, now everything's going to be okay. When the immigration process can be extremely complicated and can involve a lot of suffering and a lot of difficulty. And so I think that in some way that kind of, and I understand that it was because the boys wanted to be I think the purpose was so that the boys could be reunited. But I think it does play into American exceptionalism a little bit, in terms of well, why don't they just all come to America and everything would be fine? So I think that's a limitation.
Great. I just want to point out something Leslie put in the chat, which is there's no background. This is one limitation on the Syrian conflict, or sense of what prompted the migration, right? So in that sense, that is a limitation, because it can sort of perpetuate what we discussed earlier, what we even saw in that movie clip, or when you watch, if you do see Planet of the Arabs, just the constant images of violence. This is just a violent region, right? Completely decontextualized. So that could maybe perpetuate that narrative. But I mean, there's things that teachers can do to bring in to sort of challenge that, right? So if you're using the book, that's a good limitation to think about. Well, what is the background of this, of the Syrian conflict or the migration crisis, etc. Other thoughts? Have folks thought about ways that they could use this book, also considering these framings?
What age do you think that book would be appropriate for? I haven't read juvenile literature since I was a juvenile about 15 years ago. I don't know, what age would you say that's appropriate?
I mean, I really think maybe middle school or early high school, personally. I mean, when I looked, I have some resources for you. Yeah, my 15-year-old said middle school. My seventh grader hasn't read it yet. She's 12, and I'm gonna give it, I just had to finish it first. But she's a reader, right? I mean, so I think it really depends, but I think if I were teaching maybe middle school, maybe ninth grade as well, I think it would be appropriate. Yeah. But the resources, some of them even say as young as third grade, and I'm thinking, what? No, it's not third grade. I just read on one of the resources, grades 3 to 9 or something, and I'm thinking, grade 3.
My wife kind of commented that she said as a read aloud, maybe 5th or 6th grade. But I tell you that we don't do enough of that kind of stuff. But even a whole school read, I wish we did stuff like that, because that'd be a good whole school read, and you could tie in a lot of lessons onto that, a lot of lessons. It could be a gateway. You talk about the Syrian crisis, well, maybe reading the book and say, why did this happen? Or terrorism, why is it going on? I mean, but if you have a whole school read, then in different groups could manage that in different ways. Yeah, I teach for the first time 9th grade, and I can see maybe 9th graders maybe finding it to be a challenge for the ones I can get to read.
Yeah.
But I think like juniors and seniors, it might be a little bit
too young for them, maybe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we open it up to, I guess, broader questions? Maybe now is the time. In general, just, about the book, using the book, or even about the curriculum that I talked to you about a little bit. And again, I shared the background of the curriculum, and we have developed lessons, but the idea is really an approach and a framing more than anything. And so what we did, just to go back, was provided those lessons. If you're teaching about something, to pause. It's not a sequential curriculum at all. We didn't want it that way. It's like, if you need resources on colonialism or on, political movements, you might want to look at this to kind of talk about that issue. So it's meant to be thematic. It's all explained in there, but but this book is something we could maybe, as we kind of expand resources, kind of integrate that, because we also do have a sidebar of a lot of other resources on that website for other related topics. Great. Someone is planning to add it to their choice novel project. That's a great idea for geography. Wonderful. Someone asked earlier, where is Planet the Arabs available? You can find it on Vimeo or YouTube. It's a little bit harsh, and it was someone's thesis project at NYU. And it's intentionally done in a way, but I was going to show the beginning because I think it really just shows how in movies ranging from Back to the Future to just these seemingly innocuous movies that people watch, that these stereotypes are just reinforced over and over, cartoons. And when you see it just like one after the other, it's just, you really feel that single story that Chimamanda Adichie talks about, actually, and how insidious it is. Are there other questions that folks have in general? Comments?
I'll go ahead and comment. One of the things that's always difficult, I teach freshman cultural studies, and it's always difficult to get students to read. I mean, I think this is a great way to learn about other cultures, but to get students to actually pick up books and read, it seems to be more and more difficult every year. And I don't know if anybody has a magical answer.
So I also have ninth graders. I also teach cultural geography, and something that I've started doing when we do our choice novel project is we designate 20 minutes at the start of class where you just have to sit down with your book and read. I'm really lucky that I teach in a block schedule, so that works with my lesson planning. But if we don't designate class time for it, it doesn't happen. I'm also seeing in the chat audiobooks. Yeah, offering audiobooks has made a huge difference for kids as well. So yeah, planning it into my lesson is the only way it happens. If that helps. I don't know if you've already tried that and they don't do it, but.
Right. Which when I was a high school teacher, I did the same. We had reading blocks and reading periods just to kind of get it started. But there's a lot different schools and different districts to have to contend with in terms of just even, standardized testing and how that dictates. I mean, it depends on your context and where you are, for sure. I'm just going to read a few things from the chat, if that's okay. So this is a question about MENA is very political and politicized. How do you confront this in the curriculum? The ways in which countries are stereotyped has so much to do with politics in the US. Yeah, so I would say that that's the purpose of the curriculum really, is to kind of trouble those narratives. So I don't, you can go in and certainly write me after and look at some of the lessons, but for instance, we might even, there's a lesson we do of like a tale of three cities, and we look at Jerusalem, Salonika, and Istanbul at different points in time, really under the Ottoman Empire, to show that these were like vibrantly multicultural cities, where there was a lot of exchange, to kind of challenge what people think about these borders and these places today. That's all. So like we take a historical look. I'm sort of being a little reductive right now, but just to kind of get through it, or and some of the lessons we look at the role of the US in US foreign policy on a region, like that's pretty clear. it really depends on what the lessons focus are, but they're meant to just be pauses for teachers when they're teaching about certain things. So I'm going to go to the next question. If using this book to talk about reasons for migration or consequences of war, would you recommend reading the book before or after a lesson on the background of Syrian civil war? I mean, that can be open to anyone, but I would say it really depends on what you're doing. You could start with the book and then do a lesson on the background, kind of in relationship with the book. It really, really depends. It depends on like the course that you're situating it in and the framing that you're situating it in. But I think I would probably, start with the book and then kind of get into it as we're reading the book, right? When we get to those parts, maybe do a lesson on reasons for migration or causes of the war, or just kind of blend it in that way. And then thoughts on teaching about the Syrian conflict with students who have strong military ties. It's difficult to teach the conflict without questioning the American military and have experienced pushback. Yeah, so that's, I think, where we start with some of these bigger framings, right? Where we start with the single stories, where we start with the multiple stories, like we kind of do the prep work, right? To get into, and that's where this book, there is possibility, because as someone said earlier, I actually think it was you that said it earlier, Priyanka, the sort of the nuance and the humanization and, the things that, how all people should be depicted and represented are kind of really present in this book. And that might be a way to sort of start first before getting into those other discussions. And so that's where I think it could be an entry into some difficult conversations where it doesn't feel so, this is the causes, these are the reasons, kind of starting that way and then working your way. So
I can help keep track of questions and make
Great,
them out.
thanks.
So when you teach this, how are you sensitive to any MENA students who are in your class?
Right. So I think that's when we teach what? The curriculum?
Yes.
Lessons from the curriculum. I think they were designed with that in mind. I mean, I think the group that created this curriculum have connections to the region. And so we were pretty much attuned and sensitive to that as we were developing it. Either families were from there or they were from there and have connections. And so we kind of approached it as a way to sort of disrupt that. And again, I didn't go over the lessons in the curriculum, I'm sorry, but I think they are very much attuned to sort of complicate those narratives without, reinforcing the stereotypes, really just approaching it, as I just said before, from these other ways. So, the brainstorm I did with you all is for you as teachers. It's not something that, it's something you could do with students. I'm not saying that, but that might be actually kind of hard for some students too, right? And triggering. So this is, that's not suggested in the curriculum, I should say, but this is more just for us as teachers to reconsider framings and how single stories are kind of told.
Great.
So there's a great question. Are there MENA themed novels you might recommend that positively depict the more everyday Arab lives? Maybe one not linked to war and displacement. And it's really hard, I'll be honest, in young adult and middle grade literature to find that. And it drives me crazy. And because I've been looking for my own kids, really. So, that's a book that someone needs to write. I'm sure I'm talking about in English, I should say. I'm sure in other languages, those books exist, but English books, middle grade and young adult, tend to focus on war, displacement, or, I have them all. And so even in picking this book, I hadn't read this one, but until now, but there were a few suggestions, just really hard to find that right now. Where I'm encouraged, honestly, is in the last few years in general, the young adult and middle grade literature has just exponentially become so much better in terms of representation. So I'm hopeful. But if I find something, I'll let you all know. But right now, no, I can't really think of anything. It tends to be more connected to war, displacement, or displacement and war. So going back to that original point, that's where, it kind of reifies some of that story. Or just or if we're talking about Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, again, not all Arabs are Muslim, not all Muslims are Arabs. Like, we go over that a lot in the curriculum too. That's super important. But again, those tend to be kind of cultural clashes, like in the United States too. It's that trope as well, which is all true. That's all true, but it's not everything, right? So the Me Book Award might be of interest. Oh, great. What is that?
It's the Middle East Book Award.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, this page lists some children's and youth literature about the Middle East, but I have a feeling they tend to be sort of connected to these other framings, but I haven't looked at the list. Thank you for sharing that, Leslie.
You're right, they do tend to be. There are several different countries represented, but it's more migration focused than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have time for maybe 1-2 more questions, and then we should wrap up. And then we have one question here from Kristen. I'm an interculturalist in the corporate environment, and I wonder how the communication differences between American English, which is low context, challenges students to read between the lines of Middle Eastern styles. I believe that question is supposed to be these 2 messages.
Okay, let me just read it again so I understand it all. I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean that how Ahmed's English is characterized in the book? Is that what you mean?
Kristen, you're welcome to chime in.
Sorry. Unless, or anyone who might want to clarify it for me if I'm just missing something.
I'm not Kristen, but it just kind of sounded like maybe the difference in how people communicate from one culture to another, and those variances, and how maybe meaning gets lost in translation.
Right. So that's what I was thinking was meant to. I don't know. I mean, I certainly read it as, I didn't feel like things were lost in translation, but perhaps, a middle school student or high school student might not understand fully kind of the context. That might be something to consider. I didn't read it with that lens. Did anyone have a young person read the book? No, not yet. And then someone recommended a Saudi film. Oh yes, I've heard of this film. That's a great idea. I mean, there's a lot of films and they're subtitled. So you can, and that, the film production coming from the region, I think would be a great place to challenge the sort of framing that it's always connected to war, migration, displacement, dispossession, whatever it is, right? So, right. That's a great idea. There are a lot of films, I think, that could be useful.
Well, thank you so much.
And one of the goals, sorry, I wanted to think of our approach to this curriculum too was agency. Agency was really undergirding it, right? And what I mean is to show that, both historical and contemporary actors have agency and shape their worlds and trajectories, right? So it's not just these stories aren't just coming from above. So I would say anything that allows that, right, that shows complexity through agency is really, really, I think, a gateway into kind of breaking open these narrow framings and stereotypes.
Thank you so much, Maria. I want to give people a chance to leave on time if they do have to leave right at 5, but this has been an incredible talk. I feel like I've learned so much, and I hope everyone else here did as well. I also just want to...
I did put in the slideshow, sorry, because I switched gears, a couple resources about teaching about this book, right? So can I just show that real quick? Is that all right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. You'll get this, but I found several, but these were 3 I just picked up. One is from the author, this last one, just an educator guide, but I found a couple others too that might be useful if you wanted to teach about it. That were pretty good. I also saw that Teachers Pay Teachers, which didn't exist when I was a public school teacher, has a ton of resources too, but I guess you pay for them. But these were free resources that I found online specific to this book as well. So thank you.
Great. And the slide presentation, as well as this recording, I believe will be emailed to everyone who's here. You'll receive that email tomorrow. And on behalf of the Middle East Studies program, I would love for teachers here to fill out this survey. We only have 3 responses so far, and we really want some more teachers to contribute to the survey so that the Middle East Studies program can create more content to serve teachers, just like this event today. So your responses really do go a long way. If you ever have thoughts or requests for Middle East directly, you'll see me at these events. You can email me. I can put that in the chat as well. And I really appreciate you responding to that. And we have lots of events coming up for IRIS. I know Carmen put them in the chat, and we have a newsletter coming out with all of that. So lots and lots of events for all you teachers and everyone else here in the community. So again, Maria, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. And to everyone who came out today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for engaging and participating. And I hope you got something out of it. Thank you so much. Thank you.